Hello everyone. I wanted to talk about two aspects of Overwatch gameplay that I think are being neglected. Now, this only came up because a lot of conversation of Overwatch's balancing has come to light and I just kind of wanted to give my own little input on it. So I'm going to split this video into three parts. Part 1 is going to be talking about skill and reward. Part 2 will be about hero agency. And part 3 will be loss aversion. Part 1, skill and reward. So this point will be pretty simple to explain. Because Overwatch is a competitive game, it's subject to the fundamental rules of competition, the main one being that the greater skill wins. If there isn't a variance of results across different levels of skill, it kills that motivation to strive for more, the idea of why bother to try when someone can put in half the effort of me and get more for it. Overwatch is balanced in such a way that heroes that are mechanically demanding, Sigma, are actually punished for attempting to use their skill because of their high risk factor of shooting, that being you hit or you miss and deal 0 damage, whilst heroes like Symmetra or Zarya have a low risk, high reward system, since the beam can be corrected if you miss the initial firing of the beam, and the system feeds into the idea of loss aversion, which I'll cover later on. It's vital to allow a large variance of results depending on the skill of the individual. An example of this would be, let's say, an Ashe that can hit headshots constantly versus an Ashe that can only hit headshots every 5 shots. There's a very large difference in damage output between those two Ashes. If you have a Symmetra or a Zarya, there's really not much variance in results. You can't really tell the difference between, let's say, a GM5 Zarya or a Master 4 Zarya in their aiming, at least. There's not really a real way of expressing a difference in skill when it comes to aiming, which is crucial for a shooter game, because, well, as a first-person shooter, aiming is a fundamental of gameplay. You're going to be doing it constantly. Both of these characters, Symmetra and Zarya, have large beam hitboxes, so the micro mistakes in tracking aren't really highlighted. This also applies to Moira, but to a much more extreme degree, since Moira's, I guess you could say her aim grace zone, is way higher than Zarya, which fails to once again highlight the difference between players. You can't really tell a difference between a gold Moira or even a master Moira in terms of aiming. It just doesn't happen. So using the logic that the harder a character is, the more rewards you can give them, you'd think that this system is something that you can just keep repeating and the game just gets better and better, which isn't the case, which brings us to part 2. Part 2, hero agency. Hero agency is somewhat complicated, but still I'll try to explain. Hero agency refers to the amount of potential control over an outcome that a hero has, and in Overwatch the idea of control is represented in a few different ways, but a main one is damage, and we'll use that one for this example since the majority of heroes have that in common with each other. So in Overwatch, there's a serious gap of agency between the heroes, and that's the main issue with heroes like Widowmaker or Hanzo or even Bastion and Reaper, since one of Overwatch's biggest strengths is its variety of different gameplay styles. You have Doomfist, the melee combo brawler, you have Ashe, the mid-range high accuracy markswoman, or you have Kiriko, the teleporting ability nullifier. Fundamentally, these playstyles are all entitled to having high value output, but because of the fact that they're given generous aim grace zones, I guess you could say, they're not really allowed to have those high damage abilities. Think of Orisa or Roadhog. Whenever they're the meta, the game is perceived as boring or stressful, whilst when heroes like Reinhardt or Sigma are meta, the game is seen as fun or free because of those things I mentioned before. Reinhardt, sure, isn't super hard of a hero like Tracer, and because of that, Reinhardt's agency is limited to his ability to maneuver himself throughout the map, taking space, shielding key abilities, and using his shatter. But these things do require thought, which means there's potential for failure, and in doing so, it gives an enemy the opportunity to win against a Rein. Then there's Sigma, who can potentially 2-tap any 200 health hero, which is extremely powerful. So what happens is, Sigma's agency is semi-limited by his skill requirement. Most Sigma players across the board can't hit consistent 4 direct hits at mid-range like 10 meters. Once again, this gives the enemy the opportunity to outplay Sigma with their movement to throw his aim off, shoot back, chase him off if they hit their shots. It's a healthy back and forth where the outcome of a 1v1 or a team fight is dependent on your input and your ability to carry. That brings us to loss aversion, which is part 3. Now, loss aversion is a psychological concept that means when people perceive a potential loss or victory, the potential for loss has a stronger effect on the mood of a person than that of a potential victory. Now, we can apply this to the player base of Overwatch. which would explain why so many players run to heroes like Zarya or Pharah or Soldier 76, Mercy or Moira, so on and so forth. It's because of their consistency, because their primary method of gaining value or their control over a match isn't that stressing on their brain. They're allowed to make plenty of micro aim mistakes that would be horrible for an Ashe player, but for 76, it's nothing. And that takes a large amount of stress off the player. It's an easy road to high success, which has a very real consequence on the player base, since reward without effort isn't stimulating, which is a big reason as to why we play games. Now, some evidence of this would be like when Brig and Moira were released. Most players consider them bad for the game, considering their high value for minimal effort. Brigitte required no aim, or Shield Bash also required no aim, but it could outdamage a Tracer, which is pretty crazy to think of. But there's also other reasons why she was overpowered, but that was a big one. And same thing for Moira, she could dual Tracers without having to aim at all. She could just kind of hold her crosshair in their region, and she would just kind of kill them. It was ridiculous. But yeah, I just wanted to offer a little bit of my own input, because I see a lot of YouTubers talking about balancing the game and buffing heroes like Roadhog and Orisa, and it's kind of a loop when people are like, oh, buff Roadhog or buff XY character, and then they get buffed, and everyone's like, oh my god, nerf them. And then everyone comes to the conclusion that, oh, it's the Blizzard team that just suck at balancing their heroes, but it's not really that way. It's not that the heroes are, too difficult to balance, it's just that we're giving them too much credit than they deserve. A Bastion does not deserve to be stronger than a Tracer. It just doesn't. It should never be a thing. So the way you fix it is pretty simple. You kind of keep heroes in their line. A Roadhog shouldn't be stronger than a Sigma in any meta. It's just unfair. Unless you want to make Roadhog harder to play by reducing his pelt spread, so it requires more precision, then you can justify giving him his one-shot back, his one-shot hook. If you make his hook hitbox smaller, you can justify giving him that damage. But that's not the case, so he has to be weaker, he has to be D tier. It's just kind of an inevitability. But yeah, I just wanted to give my own input on it. A lot of people are talking about it. Hope that made sense. Good night.